All right, Neilson, huge congrats on your win at the Grand Prix Cycliste de Marseille.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, glad to be here.
Dude, I want to go into your perspective about what happened at the race, but I also want to give people insight as to what the day like. So I have the ride profile pulled up right now. The distance, total day, 104.71 miles. That's 167.1 kilometers. Elevation gain, 9,587 feet, also 2,893 meters vert. Total moving time is 4 hours and 27 minutes, which is absolutely bonkers. I saw the average speed is 23 and a half miles an hour for a 100 plus mile day with almost 10K at climbing. That blows my mind. And you burned over 4,000 calories. Now we go into the ride analysis and we have an average power of 259, but a weighted average power of 303. And I'm going to be honest, that number right there kind of hurt my brain. We have a max power of just over 1,000 watts, and we have a training load of 257. So, an absolutely savage day on the bike, let alone the idea that you didn't stop. It's not like this is a Fondo. I have to remind myself these things. This is not a normal bike ride. You're racing the whole time. So, from your perspective, can you give me a breakdown of how the day went, start to finish?
Yeah, it was definitely a pretty stout day in the end. It's a pretty hilly one-day race, and it's kind of open to anyone. So there's kind of a mix of sprinters and climbers and punchers. And for the most of the day, I knew I just had to save as much energy as possible. So I was pretty much just hiding in the peloton for the first, I would say, 3 hours or 2.5 hours. Just never letting myself touch any wind and just stayed in the bunch and tried to stay safe and fuel, really. And it all just came down to everybody knew that the race was going to explode on this pretty steep climb, about 50K to go, which I think is about 30, 34 miles or something like that, maybe. I just knew I had to be in position there. So just spent the whole first half of the day really just saving energy and biding my time until it was my turn to, show my stuff and do what I could on the steep climb, because that's in the past, that's always where the race kicks off for real. And it's all about just getting to that point as fresh as possible.
Yeah. So, when you started the day, did you really intend on going out and winning this thing?
I was one of the options. So part of the strategy our team had, and the strategy we were lucky enough to have, was that we really had three feasible options to win this race. One of them was myself. Another was Marijn Vandenberg. He just had won a sprint in Mallorca a few days before, so we knew he was going to be, pretty competitive if it came down to a sprint. And then the third option was my teammate Ben Healy, who was also just third in another race in Mallorca in the previous week. So we came there with three good options, which gave our team a lot of confidence. And I think it also just showed in the way I rode when I did get up the road. I had the confidence that if our group had gotten caught by the peloton, that I would have some fresh legs from some strong teammates right behind me. So I never felt any pressure to push the pace myself.
So, when you said you put yourself in position to attack on that major climb with about 50K to go, when you made that move, who went with you?
Yeah, it was a bit of a washing machine for a little while. I think a lot of riders were pretty nervous about bringing Arnaud Delis to the line, because he probably was the strongest sprinter in the race, and he finished, I think, in the top five of the World Tour ranking last year, because he won like 13 races, and he had already won a race this year. So he's a super strong young sprinter, and a lot of guys wanted to make that steep climb hard to try to get rid of him, which worked out in my favor, because compared to the rest of the riders there, I felt quite a bit stronger than most on the steep climb. And the goal was really just to follow. In the pre-race meeting, our director had told us, we have a good option with Marijn. Go with the moves, just follow. Like, you don't need to put yourself in the wind and really drive something to go away. Like, follow them, and if you end up in a good group, we'll decide what to do. And I mean, that's what ended up happening. I just followed the wheels. Just I knew which guys were stronger, which guys could probably potentially make it to the line, and I essentially just followed them. Stayed just well within myself. Never showed too much, and then once I got in the group, it was just about the whole time I was just thinking about when's the best opportunity to get away. Because when you're rolling in a group that big, half of them don't really want to push hard. They just want to save as much as possible, and nobody wants to do more than anyone else. So I knew if I was alone, I probably could go faster than the group, because I could just give it everything. And yeah, that's what kind of led to me going off on my own, because I knew if I had enough time at the top of the final climb that no one was going to take any time back on me on the descent, because I knew I could go downhill quite a bit faster than most of the guys in the race. And it's also just, really fast all the way to the finish from the top of that last climb. So when I got, the call on the radio that I had the freedom to go, I just went for it and went all in, just fully committed. Luckily, it worked out.
So you're in the breakaway and you realize, okay, people are trying to pace this thing out. Obviously, we've done enough to split away from the group, but it's not like you're going full in
Mhm.
that group. And so, am I correct about it was about 13K to go is when you made that move to punch it? So was there something in particular? Was it like, okay, top of the climb, I can descend faster than these guys, and it's a perfect way to gap out? Was that the mindset, and as to why you broke away there?
Yeah. My director in the car, TJ Van Garderen, actually had told me that the kicker at the bottom of that descent would be a good launch pad. So in my mind, I was waiting until that point. But when I looked behind me and I saw I had a gap, it was like, yeah, like, oh man, they just gave me a gap. Like they just gave me 5 seconds. They're out of the draft. Like let's just go. I was gonna go anyways. So yeah, I figured I didn't want to waste the gap that they gave me. So I just pressed into it, and luckily had some good legs on the day as well. Felt super strong the whole day, and I knew I was coming into it pretty fit, due to a pretty successful winter of training. But yeah, in the end, it was a sufferfest all the way to the top of that climb, because it's not the steepest climb. Maybe the first K and a half, it's a steep part, but then I think for the whole climb, the whole final climb, I averaged about 33 or 34K an hour, which is maybe 21, 22 miles per hour, something like that. And it was into a headwind. So
Oh
all I
my
had to
gosh.
think about was just staying as small as I could. It wasn't necessarily about the watts I was pushing. It was all about speed, because I could stand up on that climb and push 50 watts more, but my speed would drop by, 5K an hour. So I just had to keep it seated, keep it fast, compromise on power output just for speed. And that's kind of the way it had to go all the way to the line.
As you said, get small. It reminded me of the last ride that we actually did together. We were coming down Auburn Folsom. And for the non locals listening, which is the majority of people, it's a 1% downgrade for, I don't know, 8 miles or something like that.
Yeah.
And so when you're pace lining, the speed gets up super quick, and you came out in front, and like I just got to witness what you mean by getting small. And it was amazing to see how aero your body got and how smooth you stayed on the pedals. And I'll be honest with you, we were still throwing down more watts than I would normally, but I'm sure for you it was within, realistic output that you can maintain for a while. But I guess I just have that visual. And so it's cool knowing exactly what you're saying about the aero advantage really it comes into play when climbs especially aren't as steep. Then I think about you breaking away, and it almost gives me like a level of anxiety of to think about like this, group chasing me, and to understand how hard to push and how to not blow up because you still have 13K to go. So for you, like what's your mindset? Are you just listening to the radio and being like, okay, am I gapping or am I not gapping? And are you using that as your determining factor of whether or not to push? Like how the heck do you pace that last 13?
Luckily, the day before, we had done some recon, and we rode that final climb. So I knew exactly how long it was going to be. And I roughly knew about how much time it was going to take to get to the top. And honestly, my race was my finish line was the top of that climb. I knew just based on how the day went and how confident I was in my ability to descend that if I just got to the top of that climb in front with just barely enough space, that it was pretty likely I would be able to take it to the line. So it was really just metering my effort to the top of that climb. And I mean, I I knew the gaps. I was getting updates on the gaps, but it was really just as fast as I could to the top of that climb. I wasn't really easing off when the gap went out or speeding up when the gap came closer. I just tried to go as fast as I possibly could. Yeah, just try not to think about everything else going on because at the end of the day, I couldn't have gone any faster to the top of that climb. So,
So
yeah,
you basically were more concerned about pacing to the top of that climb than you were even while you were on the solo breakaway.
yeah, yeah, basically. I knew I had a gap, and I roughly knew that if I was, pushing over 400 watts, that closing a gap of 30 seconds is a like they'd have to be very organized, and they'd have to be pushing, you know, 450 to 500 on the front to close that gap by the top of the climb.
Mm.
So I knew that as long as I stayed consistent. I never had a, if I never have a big blow up, if I just, stay constant on the power, keep the speed as high as possible, that would give me my best chance of making it to the top with a gap. And it was a bit of a stair steppy climb. So, I would ease off when it would flatten out. There was even a false flat downhill for part of it. And I would just try to use that to get some recovery in and just, get a lot more aero and really ease off of the power. Just, compromise on a little bit of speed, but give myself a lot of power. You can save quite a lot on a flat road by just getting smaller. And then as soon as the road would go uphill, then I would focus a bit more on power. Try to stay small the whole time, but the balance would shift kind of more towards power output as opposed to aerodynamics. And it was just all about that balance the whole way up through every stair step.
That is so cool to hear about the change in focus as the terrain changes just to ride your fastest. It's definitely a lot of experience coming through your
Yeah.
actual race day, which is really cool. Now, at what point did you feel 100% like you locked it up? Because obviously you felt that way at the top of the climb before you did the solo breakaway, but you still got to get across the line. We all know anything can happen.
Yeah.
So, was there a feeling of just total relief and the stoke hits you like I won this thing? Like, at what point does that happen? Because I saw the video of like the look back before you sat up before coming across the line, but when did
Yeah.
it really hit you? Like, oh, okay, I'm locking this thing in.
It hit me the second I stood up, looked back, and didn't see them.
Yeah.
To be honest, I knew when I got to the top of the climb that, okay, now I've got a good chance. It wasn't really until then that I really told myself that I could really win it. But once I got to the top of that climb with a big enough gap, I knew that I had a chance to win it. And I just focused everything on speed, getting to the line as fast as possible, and just, consistent speed was the biggest thing, and taking the corners as fast as I could, never, scrubbing as little speed as possible around every corner. Yeah, I was, to be honest, I was having a hard time, understanding how long I had to go to the finish because
Mm.
on that descent, the air was so cold that it really blurred my vision. Yeah, I had glasses on, and it's not like I was just getting wind straight to the face, but it the air was just so cold in some of those pockets going tucked into the mountain that by the time I got off the descent, I was really just following the white line on the road because I couldn't see signs, I couldn't read the Ks to go, I couldn't really see too well. So I was really just, hearing what my director was saying in my ear, telling me how many K I had to go, and that was really my only reference point because I couldn't see the Ks to go on the side of the road anymore. And I was just like,
Really?
following the white line, trying to just keep it straight and get to the line as fast as I could. And once once I got into the finish straight and saw 500 to go, by the time that because I could see that sign and I could see this big old banner, like big old white banner above the road, and then I was like, okay, yeah, I think I'm close enough now.
That is awesome. And it actually takes me to a question that we got from Jonathan Lee. And he reached out, or I saw him watching you while he was doing a turbo session himself. And he was
Yeah,
so fired up and, fellow American. And I reached out to him and said, hey, do you have any questions that you want me to ask Neilson? And he asked about you looking at road signs and wondered if that was kind of what cued you into your pacing on your solo breakaway. So we kind of got that answered. But one thing you wanted to also know that I really want to know was about your fueling for the
yeah.
day, and especially fueling on the bike. It'd be great if we could hear like quickly what you ate the morning of, and then kind of what you ate on the bike. Let's start with the morning of and then kind of through the race.
Yeah. Yeah. Morning of, I mean, all day it's definitely lots of carbs. Morning of, we were staying in a French hotel. We didn't have a team chef with us here because normally I'd have like, some pancakes and like some sourdough pancakes and some rice, omelet. But we were staying in a French hotel, and they actually had nice bread in the morning. So I actually ended up just going for 5 pieces of this sliced baguette that they had, and it's quite a hefty chunk of bread. It probably equal out to about 5 slices of sliced bread, maybe 5 or 6, and yeah, couple of eggs on the side. They had hard boiled eggs set out, so I took a couple of those, and then I think I had a little bit of maybe like a cup of oatmeal as well with just normal milk, some honey, some blueberries,
Did
and
you
that was
put butter on your toast? I'm just curious.
yeah, butter and
Yeah, butter it up.
butter and
Oh,
jelly.
perfect. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of a pretty straightforward breakfast. Just a little bit more than an average breakfast, but a normal breakfast, I guess.
So if you
um,
looked at the macros of that breakfast, it'd be carbs number one priority, and then it looks like you have a decent amount of fat just through the butter, a little bit in the milk and egg yolk, and then you have just enough protein to make sure you're not going to wither away. Is
yeah,
what it kind of sounds like.
yeah. Basically, just the oatmeal and the eggs. I basically throw that in to just make it all last a bit longer, just so I don't, just so it digests a little bit slower because we tend to eat about 3.5 hours before start time. So
Hmm.
because you're eating a pretty hefty amount of food, so you just need time to digest that and let it soak into your muscles a little bit before the start. And I might have like maybe a rice cake, like the cycling rice cakes that the team makes. I might have one of those before the start, but yeah, typically just the breakfast is the pre-race meal with maybe a small snack right before the start. And then getting into the race, since at the start of the year, I've only been racing on 90. Like we're sponsored by Never Second, and they make a high carb drink mix with 90 grams of
Hmm.
carbs per bottle. And I'll take 2 of those in my bike, and I'll just throw 4 or 5 gels in my pocket, and then I'll down one of those 90-gram bottles an hour along with a gel. So I'm getting about 120 grams of carbs every hour during an intense race. And
And you'll do that with starting the first hour.
yeah, immediately. I'll
Okay.
make sure I finish that first bottle by the end of the first hour. Sometimes I won't get a gel down as well, but I know that at least if I'm finishing that bottle, that I'm doing pretty good with fueling.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, the starts are always pretty quick for the first 10 or 20 minutes. So I mean, you are getting some carb burning during those first few minutes of the race, anyways. So um, yeah, it's good to just keep it topped up because it's a drink mix. It goes pretty quick through your system, and it doesn't really feel too heavy in your stomach. So you can just keep pumping it in, and as long as we've gone through a few weeks of building our stomachs up to be able to handle that just through training and getting used to that in training so that when we get to a race, it doesn't, upset our stomach or anything, and we can process it.
How many
Yeah,
grams of sodium are you taking in each bottle?
I'm actually not sure. I know it's that information is definitely available on Never Second website, but
I'll have to
um,
look it up. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not 100% certain on that. Um, yeah, I'm not sure,
That's
but
good to know. Honestly, I love that you're honest about that because the way that people nerd out about these like splitting hair differences, and not to say that sodium intake is a splitting hair. I mean, it is important. You know, you're getting the sodium in, you know, your team's
yeah,
got your back. There is that layer of protection there.
yeah,
But the questions I get as a trainer are
mhm.
like sometimes people will ask me things and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I want to help and I want to guide you, but I think you know this doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah. It's a hard one because I mean
yeah,
everybody burns through sodium at different rates. So
right.
I mean, I've never been salty in a bike race in my life, so I know I don't burn through sodium as quick as most other people.
Hmm.
Uh, so I've never had to really focus on it. I know I have some teammates that they really get into the nitty and gritty of how much they need, and they're putting half tablets inside of some of their drink mix bottles so that they're hitting that perfect amount. But um, yeah, for me, like my sweat rate is pretty like the sodium in my sweat like is pretty low, so I'm not really losing too much, so I don't have too much to replenish. So it's not something I really need to focus on too much, luckily.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to know that. Okay, you know, it's not something that's as important for you, maybe because the sweat sodium rate is a little bit lower. But I have heard interviews with other riders like Matteo Jorgensen who said they
Yeah,
have an abnormally high salt and they're
yeah.
taking salt tabs and all that stuff. So no, it's good to know, man. Everybody is different, even the pros, which is pretty sick. So you start out with the two bottles and two gels in the first couple of hours. And then does anything change as the race progresses?
Yeah, so the staff that are on the side of the road that are giving us food and bottles during the race, they don't normally carry 90-gram bottles, so I typically take a 60. Yeah, I took I think a 60 and a 30. So the carbs I was getting from the bottles went down from that point, but I just followed that up with, an extra two gels each hour. So just kind of made up for it that way. And I just, started with five gels. So it was already enough. And when I grabbed a musette at like the halfway point, I took out a 60-gram bottle, took out a 30-gram bottle from that bag, threw a couple more gels in my pocket. And that's what took me to the line.
No way. So purely gels and liquids for
Yeah.
four and
Yeah.
a half hours.
Yeah. That was it.
Was there any point where you felt like you could have used a little bit more in your gut, like a little rice cake bar or anything like that?
Not in this race. I would say in during stage races, that afterburn effect is pretty intense. So I typically would take on more solids during a stage race. But in a
Mm,
1 day race, your body's already so topped up before you start that
yeah.
I tend to not feel the need quite as much for solids unless it's a 7 hour race.
That afterburn is a really great tip. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but it definitely changes the dynamic of nutrition when you're, plugging days on in like that.
Yeah.
Um, I love that, dude. Well, thanks for giving us the full breakdown. It's super cool to hear exactly what you're doing, kind of what your mindset is, and then how you were thinking in the race. And then even the fact that you couldn't see at one point during the race and you're just relying on the white line and waiting to see the finish banner. So
Yeah.
is there
Yeah.
anything else that you want to kind of add to talk about the day before we roll?
Um, yeah, not too much, I guess. Yeah, the theme of the day was just speed. I mean, we focus on power. That's all you really focus on when you're training, and that is so important to give yourself the foundation to get these results. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, I probably could have pushed 30 more watts in the last 30K if that was all I was thinking about, or last 13K if that's all I was thinking about. But when it comes to races, speed is the only thing that matters. So yeah, it's good to focus on power when you're training, but you should also practice speed as well. Just getting
That
used to
is
what
rad.
feels faster, what's making you faster, how you're holding your head, and that way when you get to a race, maybe it's a bit more natural.
Beautiful. Absolute mic drop advice right there, dude. Thank you so much. And anything you want to plug before we go? I know that people can go and follow you on Instagram. It's Neilson.Powless, right?
I believe that's my Instagram handle.
You have to check.
Yeah, double checking now. Neilson Powless, no dot.
No dot. Okay, I
Just
was wrong.
Powless. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, go and follow Neilson on Instagram, you guys. Make sure you keep track of his season because he's already coming in swinging. And big shout out to Education First in general. You guys are having an incredible start to your year. And dude, thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. I know it's going to help a ton, and it was super just fun to get to talk about this thing. So, congrats again, and hopefully we can catch up after your next win later this season.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.